helps.
All right, I am now joined by GTAA producer and resident movie correspondent Forrest Miller.
How's it going?
Jacobin deputy editor Micah Uetricht, philosophy professor and Give Them an Argument book cover artist Ryan Lake, and Daniel Bessner, who I understand from the last couple days of Twitter is now a QAnon supporter. Is that right?
I just think the storm is upon us. What can I say?
Yeah, fair enough. I actually wonder what's going to happen to QAnon now. Like, is the because you'd think, like, is the idea, like, is the theory going to shift to, like, Joe Biden as being president is Donald Trump in disguise because the real Joe Biden has been arrested and executed? It's very unclear to me what the move is at this point now that Trump isn't president anymore.
I did just see something tweeted that there was some big QAnon guy. I don't know the structure within the organization, but some big QAnon guy said, "Okay, it's done. It's time to move on." Put some little message out. I'm assuming that's not going to kill the QAnon movement. I'm sure now he's part of the conspiracy too. But right.
There was one thing on Twitter where they were saying that the new QAnon theory, because it has to keep like multiplying, is that Donald Trump is going to hand down Joe Biden like the information about how to hunt down like
there you go.
That Donald Trump actually staged it so Joe Biden would be the new QAnon president or whatever. So maybe just keep going, All
right, I like it.
I think the big question is how many people will essentially become depoliticized. And I don't think we're going to know for a while. My prediction would be that most would become depoliticized or apolitical, but there'll be an ever more extreme fringe.
Right. It'll be like in Leninist terms, it'll be like better, fewer, but better. Like there will be fewer foot soldiers, but there will be more cadre. And there will be more bad shit.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Right. If you're going to stick with QAnon after this, like you're really in there.
Right. So. You're about that life. Yeah.
Yeah. You're about that life.
Yeah. People should check out the article that Danny wrote with Amber Frost about QAnon. And I should also say that if you like your Bessner, you can not only keep your Bessner, but get a lot more of him in the next little while. Since you're going to see him well, at least once more if you watch the show, but twice more if you're a patron in the next week because he's going to be on the show on Monday along with Katie Halper and Rania Kalik for a panel about Biden and U.S. empire. And what we know so far about the Biden administration's foreign policy, and he and Amber Frost are going to be on next week's Thursday episode for patrons, talking about this article, which is how the QAnon cult stormed the Capitol. You can always tell that you're about to read a very sympathetic rendition of something when it's called a cult. but I don't know. Whatever. Twitter's going to Twitter.
I mean, it's kind of interesting, and I'm sure everyone on this panel has experienced this, but I think like in the last few months, my Twitter has gotten like way bigger. So where I used to like just talk to kind of historians and left-wing intellectuals, it's now like different. So I need to approach how I do it. You know, it's just a different thing when you have, I don't even have that many, but it's different than like 3,000 followers, you know? So it's interesting as a intellectual phenomenon, I think.
Yeah, no, for sure. So a different way to put that is that the more people who follow you on Twitter, the more stupid shit is being screamed at you all the time. So, which I think is just empirically true. You know, that bears out. But it's a good article. It's a very like careful and thoughtful take on the phenomenon. It's not anything that anybody, you know, I think, who wasn't just doing bad faith quote mining could interpret as remotely sympathetic to you know, the beliefs or goals of the QAnon movement, but it is an attempt to understand what's going on there. So that should be a good conversation. That's coming up, like I said, next week. This week's Thursday episode for patrons coming out tomorrow is the monthly Sopranos recap bonus episode with Nando Villa, Big Waz, and Mike Racine. So that's going to be a very slow scenic tour through the Sopranos. You know, this is 3 months, you know, 3 episodes in, but those were always fun. And speaking of gangsters, we prepared for this seamless transition. By reading Wiseguy by Nicholas Pileggi, which is the movie that Goodfellas is based pretty closely on, actually, having read it.
Yeah, very closely.
Yeah, like there are pretty much lots of stuff is left out, of course. You know, it's a relatively short book, but you're still going to leave out tons of stuff for the movie, and there's a lot of like compressing and rearranging and consolidating things for the sake of storytelling, but basically everything that's in the movie, you know, did happen and is discussed in the book. So
to the point where it's kind of shocking. It's like I assumed that the movie was playing up stuff, you know, for cinematic effect, and it's like kind of the opposite. Like Scorsese had to leave a lot of stuff on the cutting room floor, if he writes in the book is true.
Some of it's the craziest, like the most out there stuff too, is what he has to like leave on the cutting room floor. Like,
yeah, absolutely. So I think most notably the bit where is involved in actual, like briefly involved in actual like human slavery.
Yes,
yes, that was wow. Yeah,
I had to pause it. I rewound it. I was like, wait. A slave?
Like,
yeah. I like puts it really casually too. He's like, you know, I gave him the money, and next thing I know, I had a slave. Like,
and then the slave, you know, they were going to use the slave for daycare, but the children were frightened, so they sent the slave back to Haiti.
Yeah, the slave was too scary.
Oh my god! But I mean, it's consistent because that's the sort of general tone of it all. Is very matter of fact, like through, you know, throughout the book, as he's describing, you know, murders and disposing of bodies, and certainly day-to-day activities like, you know, shaking people down, and actually one of the most interesting, you know, things that's for it, you know, I mean, it's all consistent, it's all the impression you get from the movie, but you know, it's like really spelled out in the epilogue, is how unbothered he really seemed to be, even by his like violation of mafia ethics at the end, when he's turning on everybody he's ever known, and he's informing on everybody, you know, like this lifetime of crime. He's just spilling it all, and everything from the Boston College point shaving to the hijackings, to the murders, to, you know, to everything. All of the guys that he spent his entire life, you know, hanging out with and going on vacations with, and, you know, spending time with their families. That it's just, you know, he seemed very unbothered by you know, by destroying guys at the end.
he's like convinced that, I mean, by the FBI, I mean, which is probably true, that, you know, Jimmy Burke is going to murder him. So his biggest tie to the, you know, to that lifestyle and to that lifetime of crime is, and Paulie's turned his back on him. So his biggest ties to kind of being protected by that, you know, in that lifestyle are gone. So as soon as he's untethered to that, he's kind of ready to take revenge on everyone that he feels like has wronged him.
Yeah, it's interesting that it wasn't like a painful thing for him though at all. It didn't seem to be. Like even for Paulie, it seemed painful. Like Karen describes how Paulie had tears in his eyes when he turns his back on Henry. For Henry, it's just like what, like they mentioned, like I can't remember if it was Paulie or Jimmy, but right before he rats on one of them, it's like, yeah, he had a sausage and mushroom pizza, and then he went in to testify. You know, it's just like just nothing.
Yeah, the sociopathy comes through in the book in a way that it doesn't in the movie.
Yeah.
I mean, Ray Liotta is incredibly handsome and incredibly charming. And so like the book, I think, gives a better flavor of like the world that it was actually a part of. It's like grimier and like the true sociopathy of a lot of these people, which I think is underplayed in the movie. I mean, I think that the narrative form of a film protagonist almost necessarily, you can't, you know, it's hard to have like a genuine sociopath to take you through the thing. But if you actually read the book, I mean, these people are deranged. Like a real way.
Well, Henry's sociopathy comes out not only in how he has no problem turning on all of these people, but how he uses the whole thing as one last con, right? Or well, actually, if we know his history, we know that it actually wasn't his last con. But like he you know, the epilogue portrays him as having, you know, used he got the best of a bad situation and he came out pretty good. He's got a government paycheck now. He's a public sector worker at this point. Like,
that's right. Yeah, several times a year for work with the Organized Crime Task Force. They're flying him to New York.
Right.
You know, he can't go to Little Italy, you know, for obvious reasons while he's there to go to restaurants, but he's getting food from those restaurants delivered to him at the places that he's staying. Which yeah, like really actually another thing that comes, I mean, I realize we're starting, you know, literally at the end of the movie here, but one of the few striking differences that's not, you know, just a matter of rearranging things is that in the movie they really play up, and I guess this is the note that the book ends on before the epilogue, that the idea that Henry is going to be leading this kind of dismal, mundane life now, that he just has to be a regular person. But what really comes across in the epilogue is, let's not exaggerate, right? Like, you know, he doesn't like how in, you know, God knows, Indiana or wherever they were keeping him, he, you know, he can't find any good Italian food there, but, you know. So,
well, the actual Henry Hill goes to jail at least one more time. Like, he goes to prison at least one more time, and then he goes to jail at least one time after that for his like addictions and for his many vices. Like, he spends his life unable to quit those things.
Right.
And, you know, even towards like the very end of his life, he's like, he was working in a restaurant as like a chef and like stealing liquor from the restaurant constantly. So he's unable to leave that like Wiseguy like mindset and lifestyle for his entire life, even as he kind of paints this picture of himself as someone that's kind of been redeemed through it, which obviously he hasn't whatsoever.
Yeah.
Did you guys, were any of you guys able to listen to any of the Howard Stern interviews with Henry Hill? They're really interesting because, like, I think Forrest is right. I mean, he craves some sort of recognition again, ethically, to the degree where when he was in witness protection, I believe he was calling into Howard Stern. You know? There's something profoundly wrong with this guy, but like. That enabled him to be our Virgil in the lives of the mafia, right? I it's just not possible in the same way if someone was a different guy.
Yeah, it took me a second there to realize you're talking about Virgil and you know, Dante Virgil, not Chapo Virgil, and but I got it now.
Yeah. I mean, even his sociopathy. You know, he's kind of making these rules for himself the entire time. And then as he breaks those rules, he kind of makes more rules. Like, it seems like he is very uncomfortable with violence when he feels like it's unnecessary, but very comfortable with violence when he feels like it gets in the way of business, or when he feels like the person deserves it, or when he feels like the person is going to turn on the organization. likewise, he seems like everybody that, you know, like rats on everybody else. He's until the moment that he sees it as his own survival, he's very against that. But as soon as he feels like his own survival is on the line, he's willing to pretty much just change whatever rules are happening in his head that he's created for himself.
Yeah, no, that seems completely right. You know, he's obviously, yeah, even mafia, you know, ethics, never mind any sort of regular human morality, is clearly not, you know, really bothering him in any non-instrumental way, really at any point. You know, he's like, you know, there's a little hint of, you know, of he couldn't believe that, you know, Jimmy would be willing to kill him, but he's but you know, in terms of his own willingness to you know, to rat everybody out, again, it doesn't bother him any more than, you know, than the lifetime of being a murderer, you know, ever did.
Did you guys get a better sense? I mean, I still didn't get a sense, though. I don't know. Tell me if I'm wrong. Of like what produced him. You know, like what produces Henry Hill? You know, like it's still hard to get that from the book. Like, I mean, ultimately, you can't like explain everything, but it's still like a lot of people came from that background, and a lot of people don't become like these vicious murderers effectively. I don't know. It still is like sort of a question, and maybe you just can't.
Well, I think there's two things. In the beginning of the book, he talks about his father, who had an electrician job. He was a union guy, which should have been a ticket to at least a decent life for his family, but instead his family felt like they couldn't ever make it past this pretty low rung that they were stuck on. And so, not to turn it too much into a kind of socialist morality tale here, but like that is what he says in the book, is that his dad's inability to ever like make it past that rung that they were on really affected him. And then when he falls in with this crowd who you know, when you go from that level of like, you know, just stayed hard work that his father's putting in for the family, and you see this guy's super bitter, and then you see this other extreme where these people are just able to meet every whim and every fantasy that they might have, and they're just peeling bills off of giant wads and handing them to every person that they walk by on their way into the club or whatever. I mean, it's like that gulf is so massive. It's like, well, why would I go back to here when like I've seen that I could be living here?
Yeah,
and it just feels good. It feels much better that way.
And that's Scorsese. You know, that's the same thing in Wolf of Wall Street. They have that exact same theme. So this is clearly something that Scorsese is like really interested in how the failures of capitalism or whatever engender the crime against it. I don't know. I'm thinking out loud here.
No, I think there's definitely something there. And actually, yeah, even in the Departed, which I was just randomly, you know, watching some clips from the other night.
Me too, yeah.
Oh yeah.
I randomly watched the whole thing. I'd never seen it before.
Okay. Yeah. See, you know, my take on The Departed is I mean, there's so much that's good about that movie, but it's almost better to watch a YouTube clip so you can get all of the amazing scenes without having to think about the plot. But but yeah, there's tons of stuff very explicitly about class, you know, in there. You know, about the, you know, main character being this like, you know, lace curtain upper class, you know, Irish kid who's still, you know, straddling, you know, the poor neighborhoods where this is happening. But yeah, and in the book, you know, Wiseguy, this comes out very explicitly. I mean, this is actually, I was talking to Danny about writing a Jacobin piece about the book, and as I was reading it, or, you know, listening to the audiobook, there's a line really close to the beginning, and I was thinking, oh my God, this will be the perfect, you know, Jacobin hook for it, because it's almost straight out of the lyrics of Solidarity Forever, you know, where there's that thing about, you know, we stand outcast and hungry amid the marvels we have made, we have plowed the railroad track, all that stuff. And there's this line where he's talking about his dad as this union, you know, as an electrician, you know, and you know, he's saying, you know, like part of what drew him into the lifestyle is, look, my dad worked on skyscrapers, you know, but we could never live anywhere but this crappy apartment. You know, he made this and that and the other thing, but, you know, we never got to enjoy any of that. That just seemed like a terrible way to live to me. You know, and this is the only thing that seemed, you know, this is the only thing that struck him in that time and place as like, as a realistic path to living in a different way. You know,
Karen says the same sort of thing too to rationalize it. She's like I think she says in the movie too. They take the same monologue, like, our guys, they're not celebrities, they're not brain surgeons. This is the only way they can make an extra buck, and so that we just admire our guys. They're the guys who are willing to go take the extra step to make an extra buck the only way they can. What else are they gonna do?
The other thing that doesn't get touched on in Wiseguy, but that he touches on later when he wrote like a second book about Lufthansa, and the thing that he touches on in that is that he had severe dyslexia. So when he was failing out of school in the beginning, he calls himself half literate when he's in prison, and that's when he's taking those college classes because they're actually teaching to people who haven't really had a conventional education, but he never really learns how to read. He never really learns how to write that well. Like he's just unable to. And it's in the 1950s and stuff. I don't think that they were really equipped to teach someone who wasn't like conventionally able to. Because at some point they just referred to people who couldn't read as like stupid. You know what I mean? Like you couldn't teach them. And now there's kind of more of an understanding that dyslexia is a problem that affects a lot of people and really slows down their learning process. So, a lot of the conventional jobs, I feel like that somebody could have gotten if they had, like a regular education at that time, he wasn't able to. And I'm sure that definitely contributed to him getting involved in something that he didn't need to do that.
Yeah, right. So clearly, even if he had, whatever, I think it's probably overdetermined because he'd gotten, as portrayed in the movie, he got the job at the cab stand, which, of course, even then, right, like the chain of causation goes even earlier because even before he got it, he really looked up to and admired, the gangsters in the neighborhood, because he saw how great their lifestyle was. But he got the job at the cab stand, and as soon as they found out, in fact, Henry Hill's the perfect Martin Scorsese character, because he's the two kinds of people who fascinate him, as far as organized crime goes, are Italian and Irish gangsters, and Henry Hill is half Irish and half Italian, really specifically half Irish and half Sicilian. So when they find out that he's half Sicilian, he goes from being this kid who has a part-time job to somebody who they see as part of their world, and they're much more willing to give him opportunities to become more part of it. And so from that point, he's really very uninterested in even trying, to go to school because he, why would you? There's, he has like the world at his fingertips through his association with the mafia. Whereas, even if he didn't, have a learning disability, this sort of path of like going to school and trying to get into college and doing something with that, seems like at the very least a much like steeper and path and much less of a sure thing.
And then the biggest path to success, at least at that point, is like getting a union job and probably seeing his father, kind of fail out of that being a path to success. I mean, especially because he's unwilling to do anything, like below the law or something, or like getting, unwilling to get involved in that, which it seems like in that neighborhood, the mob is very involved in the unions. So it would definitely show that like the straight and narrow path had kind of failed his father.
Yeah. And I would also say, I think the dyslexia itself, like even though obviously now, that's not as nearly as much of an impediment, to educational success, as it would have been when Henry Hill was growing up. I think there is a larger thing, right? I don't want to dwell on the political upshot the whole time, but that it does say something, right? Because coming out of that, right, he wants to have a life that's better than his father, and okay, so obviously the mafia is a very easy path to that, and it helps to like apparently not have any sort of empathy, which definitely seems to be the case. But also, like, it really does show like there is really a larger lesson there about how empty it is to think to have your whole solution to economic inequality be educational attainment, because even if dyslexia again wouldn't be as big a deal now. It just human variation being what it is, and by definition, there being a limited number of spots at the top of the meritocracy, like that's just not going to be something that's going to work for everybody or even for most people, and it can't be.
Do you know what? Maybe this is crazy, but do you know what struck out to me is like Henry Hill's the ultimate freelancer. You know?
No, totally. I was thinking. I kept thinking about that when he was describing all the different things that he's doing.
He always has 20 things going on at one time. I mean, again, not to be, kind of the parody of this sort of like everything's worthless, but it's interesting that the political economy in which he is operating is a freelance, precarious economy.
No, that's right. That's he was in a very early version of the gig economy.
It's basically what happens in the absence of structure, right? Yeah. This is a community that it's not left behind in the way that some Black communities have been left behind. It's just not in the same way. But it's this super outer borough of New York. It is really in the sort of like furthest area of New York. It's not a political constituency that, unless you're a cop or a firefighter, has particular power. And so it's interesting that he basically like. The mafia serves as his umbrella of this gig economy, which I mean, obviously I'm reading it through the lens of today, but it's interesting, No,
totally. I mean, there's a point when I was listening to it, I was just sort of imagining what the the lefty, the lefty podcaster version of the same narration would be. It's like, okay, you have to understand, it wasn't just doing the podcast. There's also Jacobin, and and at the same time, I'm working a side thing with it's like.
Then I had my OnlyFans.
That's right.
The other thing, though, is that conventional education and meritocracy might have failed him, but he is very much involved in his own version of education. Like everything that he does throughout the book, and it doesn't really come out in the movie, but throughout the book, like he's educating himself on these hustles, and a lot of them are extremely complicated and require a lot of different people. And they require this person not to know about this person and this person. Like it's an extremely complicated set of things that he's learning how to do all these things. He's educating himself constantly.
I mean, a third of the book is him just describing the intricate patchwork of all of these schemes. He's just listing out all the stuff that he had to do, all the stuff that he had to juggle at the same time. This person could do this person couldn't do this. I knew that this had to be here at this point. It's like this guy could be like a corporate manager. Like his like ability to see the whole field at the same time is incredible.
And a lot of the people from this specific cultural and ethnic milieu actually became bankers. Like at the time that Henry Hill was doing this in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the book by Michael Lewis, Liar's Poker, is really good on this. Banking is actually like an ethnic white thing to do. It's only in the last 30 years that it became sort of like professionalized, and we get sort of the finance warlocks that we have today. So it's actually kind of interesting to see how other people from that same ethnic group, one of whom being, for example, Antonin Scalia, Martin Scorsese, from literally the exact same spaces in the country, made different choices. It's interesting to think about as second, third generation ethnic whites and sort of Catholic whites and what position and where they went.
Yeah, although not. Right. So in his case, right. So second, at least like his father, was actually an immigrant from Ireland, and his mother, I'm a little unclear. How long her family had come, been in the U.S. From Sicily, But yeah, no, that's right. And actually, also a very minor thing didn't come out clearly, at least in the movie, as far as the cultural and ethnic question, is that he actually did convert to Judaism to marry his wife, which was not at all clear to me in the movie.
No,
and
he got a circumcision.
He got a circumcision.
He had to walk around in a diaper for a whole month.
Yeah, which of course is great, because like that detail about the diaper comes from his mistress's point of view.
Yeah, and it does. He makes it seem, him and Karen make it seem like it was his idea to convert, and then she's like, no, she made him convert and get adult circumcised, and
yeah, because that's part of her case for how she wasn't like Karen was awful and really Henry should be with her, but yeah, and he and as part of this, he's so in fact in prison, he's using this extensively. In various ways, the fact that he is technically Jewish now, so he gets like the gets 2 kitchens in like the sort of country club prison where he ultimately ends up. And by the way, we should get into how he gets there. He ends up going to having like one of his million scams for getting to spend some time away from prison is that he has a rabbi who's pretending to give him religious instruction.
Is giving him religious instruction at first, and then he begins to pay him off to like do other, you know what I mean, to push him further and further out of there, and eventually go home. But the classes he's taking are they are religious classes with the rabbi. Like they're just an extremely cushy version of that.
Right. And eventually he's like just spending the weekends in Atlantic City and putting the rabbi up in a hotel and giving him some cash.
Yeah, I really like that. I mean, really liked it. It's kind of depressing, but the book has such a dim view of humanity. Like everyone can be bought. Everything is a potential scam, which is, an accurate representation of capitalism, like a real way. I mean, it's kind of like to think of like where we are. It's kind of like, with Trump, everything that's subtext becomes text. The same is true with this book. It's like the subtext that defines this political economy reflected in its like and form with the mafia, where everything is for sale, everyone could be bought, there's no morality, you just do what you do to get yours. It's like profoundly situated in a particular moment of the political economy, this post-war boom, which I think is important.
Trump is very much a product of that time period, of that location as well. You know what I mean? Like Trump's business deals originally as like a real estate, like, I don't know, like working in real estate, like he was touching up on a lot of these figures. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
there are actually old interviews where Trump pretty like is actually kind of bragging about like having had like dealings with organized crime in the past. So I mean, I think even Trump was like smart enough not to name names in interviews. But
although it's hard to know how much of that is true and how much is just like Trump would feel like a badass. But,
yeah. We love our Gambinos. We do.
Yeah. So, and also speaking of political figures, the way that he gets into that country club prison, have the kosher kitchen and everything, is because he was in a somewhat real prison. The way that that's portrayed in the movie, the way that his prison experience is portrayed in the movie is pretty much what's described in the book. At the original prison that he was at, but then there was like the crazy, like the crazy lax rich people prison, which he got into because Watergate, co-conspirator, and then later right-wing talk radio host G. Gordon Liddy was in that prison, but he organized some sort of food strike and got like 50 other prisoners there to go along with it with him, and then eventually
a real Gandhi figure.
Everybody seen Oliver Stone's Nixon movie. That's one of the things that always made me laugh in that movie is like Nixon conferring with, I don't know, Dean or somebody about this, and he's like, "Oh yeah, who do we have in charge of that? Liddy." Oh, Jesus, he's a fruitcake. That's also, I should say, Nixon's MO. Like there's this quote from him that I remember. I think they mentioned on the Know Your Enemy podcast, maybe, which was the that like Nixon, even though he was in many ways like a pretty centrist, kind of Republican, establishment Republican, like he always had a sense of how to use people like Liddy. Like there's this classic Nixon line about how if you really want to get something done, find a good right wing exuberant, to do it for you. So then after G. Gordon Liddy's Gandhi moment, Liddy and the other people involved in the food strike are transferred to real prisons, and then all of these spots open up at the country club prison, and then Henry takes the opportunity to wheedle his way with his like many schemes and connections to get onto the list to transfer to fill up the spots at that prison.
Yeah, that was amazing, and I loved how Henry knew as soon as he heard about the the food strikes. Like he knew what was going to happen. He started planning right away. It's like, yep, the feds is going to ship these guys off to real prisons, and there's going to be 60 open slots there, and I've got to start working my way into one of those. It's amazing.
What a testament to G. Gordon Liddy that he is exactly that kind of right-wing exuberant. That he blew that opportunity to have a chill prison experience. So much of a he's what Corey Robin call it. He's like a Burkean, like he's just like on fire for like his reactionary ideas to the point where he's gonna like fuck up his whole life in prison because he feels it so strongly. He's so dedicated to it.
Yeah, right. Like this prison where they have, everybody's got their own room. They have, you can spend as much time, in visitation with your family, like during the open and visiting hours as you want. You can have your family come every day. There's a daycare, for the kids to play in, which, I mean, obviously it's what in a slightly more civilized society, all prisons would be like,
right.
Very different from normal American prisons.
Yeah.
There's also that transitional step between those two things where he works on the farm, which I feel like we should talk about as well, because that's such an interesting that's such an interesting part of this. Like they have, because these prisons at the time when they're not private prisons, they're federally owned prisons. They have these they have to create their own like milk, their own product, and supply them to the Bureau of Prisons. So like it's really interesting that they have that farm, and that one of the ways that they enforce, I guess, good behavior, or in Henry's case, things you can bribe your way into, are having this farm that they basically give you limited supervision as long as you're like willing to be a farmer. I mean, for the most part.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, and again, he schemes his way into that, and I mean, because he has bribed so many guards, and even the guards who won't take money are still too loyal to the ones who do to turn them in. So he, like, part of the whole deal is that he technically has a completely clean record for his entire prison experience, even though he's committing like 20 crimes a day.
Yeah. He leaves the prison with the letter that's like, oh, he's unlikely to go back to prison. Like the model prisoner. Like really. I also like how Karen leverages his like strong family ties part of that letter.
Right.
Yeah. I said this on the last stream when we were talking about the movie, but it's just like thinking about how he managed to keep, as I said, he maintained like the field of vision, he always knew where every piece was in the thing. It was all built on like such, at any point if something had collapsed in the House of Cards, the whole thing would have gone down. And he just like manages to keep it all upright and humming along. I just find it like in my own life, I sort of like gave up like telling white lies in my personal life a long time ago, because I knew that I do not possess the abilities that Henry possesses to be able to keep my lies in order so that everything else can keep going. So I just like, no, just don't lie, because you're gonna fuck it up like within 20 minutes of lying. So just keep it on the straight and narrow. It's just easier and it's less exhausting that way. Like Henry must have been exhausted at all times as his mind is running like this to keep all this going.
Yeah, I mean, so part of this, I mean, that's how he ends up in the place where people, one of the most intense parts of the movie is at the end when he's seeing the helicopter all day, and and the sweat is pouring down his face, and he's almost getting a traffic jam and all that. And part of the way he got there that you really get in the book is that because he always has 200 schemes going in at a given time, and remember, part of like all the drug stuff at the end is actually has to be kept secret, from the main mafia, since Paul Vario, right, Paulie in the movie has prohibited that, not of course because of any sort of moral objection, but because that's because he's worried that exactly what happens to him eventually will happen. Right? That Henry being in that world, that anybody who's working under him being in that world will lead to them ratting him out, because of the prison terms. So he's essentially, he has presumably whatever Paulie thinks is what he's doing, more or less full time. All of his like regular mafia schemes, and then he's also doing his drug running on the side, and he's like taking a crazy amount of uppers just to like stay awake long enough to do everything that he's doing over the course of any given day. So it's very, very easy to see how he could have ended up, with a coke problem and everything else that he has at the end of the movie.
Yeah, it's such a stressful life, and it's interesting that also it's sort of the interesting transition of the Rockefeller drug laws and RICO, I believe, right? Like those are the two big structural transformations which make someone like Paul Burial really afraid of anyone dealing drugs under them, if I recall correctly. And so it's an interesting thing how the mafia transitions basically over the course of Henry's career and the destruction of organized crime. I mean, his career, I think, literally traces the collapse of post-prohibition organized crime. Which is pretty interesting as just a sociological phenomenon. And I think today, I'm not an expert of it. My sense though is that there's no like five families equivalent any longer, that there's a bunch of different organized groups in various cities, but there's no sort of like the organized crime is actually less today than it used to be. Especially with the internet, I imagine there must be so many, opportunities for individualistic schemes.
Even in the Sopranos, you're getting quite a bit of that, even though it is like the story centers on traditional organized crime, but there are all kinds of like weird wannabes and kind of like third tier, hangers on, and people running different schemes who aren't quite affiliated with it, that are always like swirling around like the main mafia, throughout the show. And I'm sure, as you say now, that's much more so. But it's, I guess thinking about that, we should go back and talk about the rise, part before the fall, and I think that one really interesting thing that's in the book that doesn't make it into the movie is Henry's experience in the military, which is actually a pretty important part of the book. So he goes in because this is actually kind of interesting. He has he's originally motivated to join the military because he has because of his dad might be endangered, by not intentionally, but certainly in a callously indifferent way, by his mob associates, because his dad has a gun that, teenage Henry just kind of stupidly, tells Jimmy, I guess. I'm trying to remember. I think Jimmy about.
I think it was, yeah.
And then Jimmy says, "Oh, interesting. Can I borrow it? Bring it back."
tells Tuddy Vario about it. He's asking because he feels betrayed by, I think, his dad not respecting his lifestyle. So he tells the Varios about it, and then they continually take out the gun that his father was using.
And then he starts to, for very good reasons, feel guilty and weird about that, right? Like, yeah. I'm actually, well, again, one of not the only, but relatively few instances in the book where he seems to, he seems to actually be concerned about the welfare of other people. That he doesn't like the idea that eventually this happens too many more times. His dad might end up going to jail, because his gun that was returned to him, was used in some crime. But he obviously doesn't feel like he can just tell, Jimmy or the Varios to stop doing it. So he thinks his only way out of the situation is just to physically leave, for a couple of years, which he does. He does by joining the military. And then, I remember on the first stream, Danny, you were bringing this up, and actually I have to get up for a minute anyway. So maybe you can take the story from this point, because I think the stuff that happens in the military sets up a lot of the prison stuff later in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, just what I said before, and I think it's right. It's that it's really in the military that Henry Hill becomes the criminal that he is in terms of the logistical organizing that Micah was talking about. And so one of the things that I think is emphasized in the book, and it makes sense more in the movie, is sort of the way that he manipulates these institutions. And that one of his great skills is his ability to manipulate institutions, first the military, then the mafia, and then prison, and then the mafia again. And of course, at some point, he ultimately can't do those sorts of manipulations. But it's just what was interesting about it to me is that it just shows how much of this post-war life was so embedded in American militarism, both with Henry going there, but also, I think I mentioned last time, but people haven't seen the fact that the Lufthansa heist, I think, is actually able to happen because it's where there's currency exchange at Idlewild Airport, which is now Kennedy Airport. And so it's interesting that Henry really does touch all of these major institutions of the mid-century. Institutions provide sort of a coherence to American society, and that we're offering, to bring it back today, that the Biden administration is kind of nostalgically pointing to in a real way. It just shows it's sort of the I want to say inherent corruption, but that might be too strong. But sort of the corruption that is possible within these institutions, and I think that it's really interesting in this period that we romanticize as so stable and so coherent. You have someone like Henry Hill just manipulating these institutions to the nth degree.
Yeah, right. Which
I had a question for Daniel, just really fast. When they say in the after the Lufthansa heist, like most of the city didn't have any historic sympathy for that bank because it was a German bank. Is that because of the post-war period and kind of our feelings of Germany as an enemy, or
it's a Jewish reference? It's because the city is New York City has a lot of the Jewish demographics are very high. I mean, even when I was a kid in the 90s, I don't know if you guys remember this, but like in the Jewish community, at least, it was like declassé to drive a VW Bug or a Mercedes Benz. And so I think that's disappeared just as the Holocaust has faded from memory. But I think that's all he was talking about. It's like it's like fuck Lufthansa. Like who cares?
Yeah. I will say my German grandmother, my Jewish grandmother, was interestingly fine with buying and driving German cars, but she wouldn't drive. She wouldn't get a Ford, because that's where she drew the line, because of Henry Ford's anti-Semitism. It's like, like some of these other companies, like cars he bought, like literally these companies were in the Nazi government, Germany.
Yeah. Well, but Henry Ford, he was a lot closer to her than whatever was going on in Germany.
Yeah,
like more, geographically, I guess it makes sense. He's like right around the corner. He's a couple states over in Michigan.
Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah. So I guess I will say there is a lot throughout the book where you do see like the pretty remarkable level of connection between the Varios and Henry through them, and Henry through his own schemes with people, with decision makers in almost every sphere, from the prison, various prisons and jails that he's in, that he's got locked up, to politicians who will like write letters for him to get better treatment in jail. And it's a little unclear the way it's put in the book how much of that is just like routine kind of constituent service stuff, that the Karen asked them to, so they will, and how much of that we're supposed to connect the dots to the places in the book where he does very explicitly talk about how many politicians were at least 2 degrees of connection to the Varios.
Well, it seems like Nicholas Pileggi is kind of not clear about how much of that is each thing, right? Because when he says it, he says, it was never clear whether these letters were just form letters or whether it was like he had an actual connection to these politicians, which is why the jails jumped on, like the prisons jumped on it. I mean, so I think that's a question that he didn't have an answer to through Henry Hill's interviews with him either.
Yeah, no, I'll buy that. But in the military case, at least initially, it mostly just seems to be that there's this massive institution, that actually, I guess, let's see, do you guys have a sense of this, like what year he would have been going into the military?
Like early 60s, I think. It seemed like it was right around 1960 or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, born in 42 or 43, so I would say between 60 and 61.
Okay.
Can someone remind me why did he join the military? It wasn't clear to me. I mean, maybe he said, but everybody around him is like, "Why are you doing this?" They immediately go into like, "We can get you out of this thing." This is like, what was it that led him to do that?
I think it was
June 1960 is when he originally joined the military.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think Ben was right. I think it was to kind of take the heat off his father when they were borrowing his father's gun. Yeah.
Although obviously it's tempting to wonder like why this in particular with his solution, Right. He couldn't figure out.
Americans were in the military. I mean, it was just a more militarized in terms of uniform before the all volunteer force.
Mm-hmm.
That was a common thing for people to do, particularly in the 50s. And basically 60s is the 50s before the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's kind of all the same.
Yeah, that seems right. And then he goes, because it sort of has that kind of almost leftover World War II, and then obviously going into the Korean War, culture of the military playing that kind of outsized role in American life. And but of course it's hilarious because the way it's portrayed in the book is, he gets into the military. He's like, oh my God, there's so many opportunities for scams here that nobody has taken advantage of. It's crazy.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. His reaction is like, why is everyone so lazy? There's so many opportunities here. Like all these guys, other guys are so lazy, and he just gets to work. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways it's like a super like Henry, even though obviously it's been funneled into the underground economy, he's like the ideal like entrepreneurial striver, that like sees, a thousand opportunities everywhere all the time.
Yeah.
And in that same vein, he sees chances to educate himself everywhere, which is kind of funny that like the fact that he dropped out of school at such a young age, like. He's constantly talking about it in terms of education. Like when he joins the bookmakers, or when he's at Fort Bragg, even like he's saying like, "Oh, I was learning things all the time. Like I was learning how to do schemes. I was learning how to make money." Like he's putting himself. A lot of times he puts himself in basically apprenticeships with people who already have these skills. So in that sense, in a non-traditional way, he really is also like like one of the world's greatest students. It's just a student of crime in particular. And even the FBI agent that ultimately gets him like notes that like he knows all this stuff because he's been learning it, because he's been putting himself in situations where he can learn about it. He's like one of the people that does like work himself up the ranks of being in the mafia because he's so willing to learn all of these different things that they can't really live without.
Yeah, he's a good meritocrat and he's a good capitalist.
That's right.
Himself up by his bootstraps. Which, again, it's really a reflection of the age. It really is. It's perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why he's so useful to the FBI when he does he does join the program, because they say normally like most mafia guys that they were used to dealing with were sort of at a very defined level of the organization. And they just existed within that level, that they were foot soldiers, they were, whatever they were, they pretty much only interacted with people who did the same stuff they did. And, the people they were shaking down or whatever. Whereas Henry seemed to have like a finger in everything, so obviously when he was willing to turn, they could, whatever, like, dozens, hundreds of, people could be convicted based on his testimony because, he was involved in various schemes and projects at like in pretty much every aspect of the criminal world.
Do you think that has to do with the fall of the mafia too? I mean, like, it seems like Henry's existence and Jimmy Burke's existence kind of shows that the mafia is becoming way more decentralized. You know what I mean? Like as an institution, like they're no longer following these rigid hierarchies where people are only able to interact with people in their own hierarchy, which would kind of which would kind of hint towards a crime structure that suddenly, these entrepreneurs are able to work their way up to a position that's undefined, which kind of would mean the fall of the mafia, right? Like,
yeah, you definitely get that impression that this is one of the things that kind of broke them, is that the old structure kept them safe, right? If you're only interacting with other guys on your level, then you get busted. You can only rat out the other people on your level. Henry was in this unique position, and Jimmy would have been too if he wanted to rat out people everywhere. And that does destabilize the whole thing.
I think a big difference between Jimmy and Henry's position is that I don't think Jimmy would have been able to work his way out of a sentence. Like Henry served 5 years, I think, but like finally when the FBI got him, but he was able to kind of use that to get himself out of a sentence. I don't think Jimmy Burke would have been able to. His crimes were far too heinous.
Yeah.
Well, that is also something we touched on talking about the movie, that it is really interesting. That's like all the many times I've seen Goodfellas, this never once occurred to me. But somebody mentioned it in the chat, on that previous stream. And so I was thinking about then, and I was thinking about it throughout the point I was going through the book. He never quite admits to killing anybody.
That's right.
That's right. In the room when somebody is being killed or helping dispose of the body later. But, somehow he's like the immaculate, gangster.
Yeah.
When it comes to actual murder, which you suspect is because if he was copying actually killing people, that would have really complicated.
Well, not only that, but in the movie, often when people are being killed, he's like, no, like let's, he's the guy who's trying to put the brakes on the whole thing, usually unsuccessfully.
He paints himself that way in the book too. Yeah, for sure. He's he doesn't want Jimmy whacking all these people. Right.
That's some of Ray Liotta's best acting too in the movie. I feel like when he's always like, oh,
hey, whoa, we're killing people now. What did this happen?
Yeah, I thought we were just running numbers here. Come on.
You didn't need to whack him for that. He's not getting in the way of business or anything. I mean, there is kind of that sense, though, in his testimony that he doesn't seem to have a problem with people getting whacked if it gets in the way of business, or if they, or if the kind of mafia code would say, like, would merit that, I guess. Like,
he's a detective, can't break the rules. You break the rules, you get punished. And I think that idea reappears in a lot of different mafia fiction, where it's essentially like a very strict code. And if you break, or at least the idea is, if you break the code, but what a show like a Sopranos does, and I think differently than what Wiseguy does or what Goodfellas does, is that's kind of bullshit. And like you could get killed because Tony doesn't like you, but this movie is this book is very much part of that myth making of the mafia as being, insane, but there are rules. There's a reason to it.
Although there's a point where he says, there are people getting killed for no reason too. He's like, people are getting killed for breaking the rules, but also people are just getting whacked for nothing. Like people have an argument, suddenly someone's whacked. Like,
I think it does a lot for the formation of something like The Sopranos, where they're pointing out those contradictions and those ironies, because throughout the book he is saying that like people are suddenly getting whacked for no reason, and then to the point where it's bad for business, which is an interesting thing. Like people are just getting killed by like these coked out like mobsters, and like these sociopathic mobsters that at some point are just like, no, like we're good at this, we like this, let's keep killing people.
Well, because he says like Jimmy was doing this like from childhood, that he was in like juvie, and he was and he was getting to fights, where he'd end up killing people, and so he was just extraordinarily desensitized to it, from a really early age. So there's a point in the book where Henry kind of lists off the categories of things that Jimmy will kill you for, and it's like, okay, he thinks you're a danger to him. Okay, he thinks you'll lose him. You'll lose him money, or he thinks you're getting too cute. Like that's like it sort of goes to the point where it's like, so it's self-preservation, bad for business to keep you alive. He's just annoyed by you, right?
Yeah, just mild irritation is also a good reason.
He also seems to put out there that throughout Jimmy's childhood, when he's getting passed between these foster homes, like he got sexually abused, he got beaten violently. So there's kind of a spark in Jimmy that isn't there, I don't think, in Henry, because Henry doesn't have a bad childhood, I would say. Like Henry has a hard childhood maybe with like parents who, his dad seems to be an alcoholic, but and his dad seems to beat the children, and his brother's disabled, but it's not like a situation that's like inescapable like Jimmy's would have been.
Yeah, he's very it's a much mild, like, yeah, even though there is an abusive element to his relationship with his father, it's clearly vastly milder than what Jimmy went through. It's kind of within the I mean, as horrible as it is to put it this way, like the normal range of like a certain kind of family, where the that things like that would happen sometimes. But yeah, and I should also say, by the way, before we switch gears, that the Sopranos, of course, is all about this, like they're constantly playing with that, pretending that there are rules, but then when push comes to shove, there are no rules. But you do get a little bit of that in Wiseguy. I mean, most notably when Tommy and Jimmy and Henry's recounting of it. Kill the guy who just got out of prison. The killing that ends up getting Tommy killed. What's supposed to be his making ceremony, and that's like clearly completely outside the rules because that guy's a made guy and they aren't. Although of course that also points up why the rules themselves are so insane. Because, and this is what, when we were talking, Forrest and I were talking at the end of the last episode about how Walter Block, who's a anarcho-capitalist who came on the show to debate me a while back, who like really embraces all of these, like, bites all these bullets about the position. Like, yeah, there'd be no public, cops or anything like that. But, that's okay. You can have private security forces. And what happens when the two private security forces disagree, which even if you help yourself to the assumption that everybody is going to be like very good, like principled deontological libertarians, who don't want to violate anybody's property rights, you will of course get the sort of disagreements that led to like Rand Paul being beaten up by his neighbor. Where is the property line end or whatever. So what happens when the security forces disagree? And it's like, okay, well then they agree on a private court to go to, and all I can say is, oh my God, you're describing like a episode that that you have. It's like, okay, you have a disagreement within the mafia or between families or whatever. What do? Well, either you fight or you have a sit down. And obviously the problem is that if you have a sit down, whose interests are going to be served by that, and certainly not anybody who doesn't have this kind of status within the organization, even necessarily the people whose interests are nominally being represented, by the equivalent of a security agency at this point, if not important clients, that like that he says in the book, you rob somebody who's being protected by another gangster, and you have to sit down, and probably what they end up deciding to do is just sort of split the proceeds.
That's right.
You're lucky if you get anything back, and it doesn't take too much imagination to come up with the equivalent of that in the kind of world that Walter Block is describing. Where
he says it. I mean, he says the mafia basically does is they're a police force for people who can't go.
That's
police.
Right.
If let's say that you take our society's vision of the police out of the picture completely, and everybody is now in that position where they're requiring these security forces to be there for them. It is a mafia state at that point. You know what I mean? Like it's like, all right, like they can go to the police because they're breaking the law. So you've created this underworld where now something else has to function as a security force to protect people who require protection. So that's the mafia. Now, if the entire world is basically an underworld and those rules don't exist, like you've just created the mafia acting as a police force for everybody.
Yeah, no, exactly. Micah, what do you want to bring up?
Well, I was just going to take the conversation in a different direction, which is that we've been talking, we've done the very crass socialists. If only, the union electrician job had paid $2 more an hour, maybe Henry's life would have turned out he wouldn't have gone to this life of crime. And there's some degree of truth to that. There's some degree of truth to some of that. But clearly there's also this element where like Henry he feels a compulsion to live this kind of lifestyle, to grab everything he can, whatever he sees around him, he's just snatching it up. I mean, that's just like who he becomes for whatever reason. And I know very little about the history of anti-corruption politics of any kind. We published in Jacobin about how they often take a pretty not reactionary, but maybe like easily neoliberal like certainly the Workers' Party in Brazil is constantly being accused of being corrupt because they're like delivering things for working class people and people in favelas in Brazil. So I'm aware that there's this sort of reactionary or neoliberal way that fighting this kind of corruption can go, but like also clearly in our future socialist society, we can't have Henrys just running around doing this stuff. So like, I'd be curious to know the sort of like, social democratic, like Sweden, how they fought these things, or what is our plan for like preventing such characters from running amok in our future utopias?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd be curious about what other people have to say. I mean, I think to a certain extent, I'm actually a little bit skeptical that there's that much more that you can do than has been done in existing societies. I mean, I think this might just be one of those things. All complex ecosystems have parasites, and you are, I think, going to, I think it's realistic to hope for less, because some of this stuff is bred by circumstances where it's easy for people to even if Henry Hill wouldn't have been Henry Hill, if he wasn't a complete sociopath, no doubt about that. But it's but also where somebody like him is going to have a sense that this is his only sort of like route to a good life. And if you don't have that, I think it's plausible to think that you'd have less of it. But I think you are going to have some for sure. I mean, I don't think there's any way around that. And then at that point, like what the solution is beyond the sort of anti-corruption things that exist in with varying degrees of success. Like and again, I do think that the larger economic situation is relevant. I think there's a reason why. Even though, of course, it was weaponized against the Workers' Party in Brazil in a way that was ridiculous and very selective, like there is a reason why there's insanely more, that there's much more day-to-day flake corruption going on in Brazil than there is going on in the United States. Never mind Sweden. I think that's obviously true. But as far as the corruption that does exist, and people paying people off and using and sort of finding ways to scam different kinds of bureaucracy that exist in any realistic society. I mean, I don't if there's a special solution to this other than the things that exist in society is actually due to limit it. I certainly don't know what that is.
First of all, how dare Micah imply that in the workers' paradise of the Soviet Union there was any crime? So I just want to point out that that's ridiculous. But no, I think Ben is ultimately right. I mean, I think that there's no way to prevent this sort of antisocial, alienated character from doing these types of things. The issue is that you would want to, I think, ideally have such a resource distribution where people are unable to, make organizations that effectively terrorize communities. So I think that is something that we'll have to address. But ultimately, in some sense, a normal socialist society will necessarily have these people. And so I think that's something that we need to address and not make over utopian claims.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say, is that, I mean, whenever I read or hear arguments like this, I feel almost a sigh of relief, because it's like, I don't have to pretend like this is something that's going to just wither away with our communist utopia. Like, we're still going to need these, we're going to need like anti-corruption task forces to deal with corrupt people in our
the difference, I think, would be is that the whole thing would be more democratic, so that what people go after would be more democratic, so there wouldn't be, and this raises very difficult questions, because what does the mafia make money on? Essentially vice crimes and murder, assassination, gambling, prostitution, and drugs and other illicit things. So like the real question I think Mike is asking is, what is the role of what are those available in a socialist society, and in what sense?
Yeah, and I also don't think they're going to be like all or nothing answers to some of these questions, because I think if you look at what's actually happening in real life, like, and I know New York State right now, I believe is considering, for the seventh time, legalizing recreational marijuana, and part of the discussion going on there is, okay, like part of the argument for doing that is that it would generate all this tax revenue, but a legitimate point that's brought up in those discussions is you don't want to set the tax rate on it too high, or else people are just going to continue to buy it off the black market like they always did, and I think that thinking about that sort of discussion like plays up the ways that I think there are like reasonable things that you could do to dramatically decrease the rate at which these things existed in the illegal economy, but hoping that you're just not going to get an illegal economy, that if just you have the right policies in place, that there's going to be no black market in anything, is probably a little unrealistic. And although I do like your point, about the sort of more democratic procedures, and also actually that reminds me of one of the things that was funniest in Wiseguy, it might have been in the epilogue or just the last chapter, which is that the main FBI agent, I guess, or prosecutor, who's involved in who was handling Henry's case, that after all of the like God knows how many hundreds of hours of Henry telling him about bodies that he buried, and and people that he brutalized, and all these really, really serious crimes, the thing that like really like morally outraged, that like seemed to morally outrage this prosecutor most, was the Boston College point shaving.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Hill had no school spirit.
That's right.
That's a great line where he's like, "This guy's never rooted for anybody." I forget if he says never rooted for anybody but himself. Like that's kind of what he's getting at.
Yeah,
I think he said never rooted for anything but a point spread. But yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, the prosecutor had himself gone to Boston College, and he'd been to some of these games, and and he was just outraged, by the fact that this wasn't all in the up and up, which of course is really, in a certain sense, one of the most innocent crimes, described in the entire book. That they paid off some guys to like win by fewer points than the spread that they were betting on.
Yeah, he wasn't even trying to change the outcomes of games, like who won. He just wanted to narrow the margin of victory to make a little money.
Yeah, that's right. But which is actually interesting that didn't make it into the movie. I think that would have been a fun sequence.
Oh yeah,
to include. But yeah, no, I think that's right. So I think that the grounds for optimism that you would have like many fewer Henry Hills under socialism, I think might go back to something that a big point is made of in the first section of the book, which is that part of the reason why these guys were able to operate with the level of impunity that they had was that these were such tightly knit ethnic neighborhoods. Like it's almost like that. What is it? Is it Che Guevara or Mao? Says the thing about the the gorillas are like the fish, and that the people are like the the sea that they swim in, that like it almost is like this like depraved criminal version of that even the people in the neighborhoods who aren't necessarily particularly involved in anything themselves feel extremely protective of the people who are involved in it, and even to the point where like they said, you can't, it's a like even when a unfamiliar car is driving through the neighborhood, then like word spreads really quickly, because it's like, what's going on there? Don't like that, tell somebody who'll tell somebody who'll tell somebody, making it like extremely hard to catch people.
That was another moment where I was just like, I think I said this in the last stream, but that's not a world I want to live in. I mean, what a suffocating world that sounds like. Like the tyranny of essentially this sort of like provincial small town life in the middle of the largest city in the country. It just sounds awful.
Yeah, no, that's right. For sure. Yeah. And yeah, especially when you keep in mind like what that actually means for people who aren't, who aren't really, directly part of it, that, like at best, you're probably have to pay these guys off all the time. That, like when they're talking about Maury, the guy with the wigs, which by the way, I really like the detail that fits in very naturally with everything you see in the movie, but you don't see it, but they don't mention this in the movie. It's just a nice touch that like part of the reason that Jimmy's getting so furious at Maury is that Jimmy has insomnia, so he'll see Maury, like wig infomercials in the middle of the night.
The movie, you see him watching the commercial of him jumping into the pool, and he's like getting furious, and he had money for a commercial, and he like beats him with
you have not have money for us, you have money for a commercial.
Also, the commercial itself is so good. He's just like looking at the camera and he jumps into the
oh god, it's such a perfectly 80s kind of infomercial. Yeah. It's fantastic.
Yeah, no, for sure. But part of the discussion about Maury is like the only discussion about shaking down Maury is since Henry likes him, he has a soft spot for him. Like he thinks like, seems like in a pretty superficial way. Like he finds Maury really entertaining, but he doesn't even want to shake him down, much less kill him later. Although it seems like there's a point where he sort of accepts, okay, he's not going to shut up about this. We're going to have to kill him. That's fine. But part of it, but the whole discussion about shaking down Maury is just whether Maury is making enough money, that to be shaken down. Like it just sort of goes without saying that if he has crossed that threshold, of course they're going to start doing that. That's just the way that things are done. But yeah, no, absolutely. So best case scenario, you're paying them off. You're if somebody who has status within the mafia that you don't, like gets it into their head that they have a problem with you, like you have very, very little recourse. You can, maybe if you have somebody who's a protector within that world, then maybe they can, have a sit down on your behalf or something. But that's like the absolute best case scenario. And you could even, be killed by somebody, and and they like Spider, in the book and movie, and Christopher Moltisanti is like when he's he's killed really just for nothing, just because he, like just because he gets pissed off at Tommy and he says something. And he tells him to go fuck himself, and Tommy is enough of a sociopath that that he doesn't just sort of roll with that in the way that he's expected to, which we should say too is one of the differences between the book and the movie. That in the book, there he talks like in the book, a lot of this Tommy stuff in the movie really is Tommy DeSimone, but also clearly, along with all of the things that are rearranged, like one of the things that kind of surprised me, having seen the movie so many times, that is made clear at the end of the book, is that Lufthansa only happens a year before Henry goes into witness protection, whereas I think for storytelling reasons, it's rearranged to be much earlier in the story in the movie. But one of the big changes, again, that makes sense from a dramatic perspective is that, yes, some of the Tommy stuff really is Tommy, but also a lot of that is just other random crazy gangsters who are sort of consolidated into Tommy, because again, it makes more sense dramatically to have there being the one super crazy, so crazy it's bad for business gangster, rather than being like, oh yeah, this is just a structural problem with the mafia. This is way too much power to give anybody, that they can just act with impunity like this. Yeah, like maybe 1 out of every 10 guys is going to be like Tommy, which seems to be more the actual situation.
It's interesting that it seems like Henry's ticket into a lot of this stuff is Paul Vario's son. And like the reason that he's kind of indispensable to them is because he's best friends with the son, and he kind of watches over him. And I think he's 21 and the son is like 17 or something like that. So he kind of takes the son around, and that's kind of how he gets in as close as he is to Paul Vario. So when Tommy's character is introduced, instead of having, Paul Vario's son and Tommy DeSimone, it seems like that character is condensed into the Tommy character.
Yeah, certainly at least the two of them, and then I think there might have been a couple stories about other people. By the way, it's just a stray thing, but since it's one I found really funny and it doesn't make it into the movie, one of my favorite details about the actual Tommy is that he drank Crown Royal, which at that point wasn't being imported from Canada to the U.S. So the line is that he's trying so hard to, be a badass gangster that he found a way to drink bootleg liquor 30 years after the end of Prohibition.
And the reason for that is that somebody in his family snitched, which is an interesting thing, because those kinds of things are kind of, it's thought of as like, if somebody in your family snitches, like that's a trait that your family has almost genetically. And
which does make it into the movie. In the spider scene in the movie, that's Tommy's defense of killing him. Whatever. His whole family was rats. He probably would have been a rat.
Yeah.
Which is funny, knowing that what doesn't make it into the movie, that part of the reason that Tommy was fronting that hard is because he actually had rats in his family, and so he had to be the super duper gangster. So nobody would think that he was going to go down that road.
Yeah, I did appreciate that the movie was true to the book, in that when Tommy shoots Spider, Jimmy Smith goes, "Well, fine, you have to dig the hole then." Like
that's his punishment.
That's the combination.
He just killed this completely innocent person who's friends with him, and like the hammer's really going to come down. That he has to dig his own hole.
Yeah.
My beautiful friends, I'm sorry, but I have to go. I have an academic meeting. But
yeah, all right. Well, we should wrap up in any case. But I will. Actually, I'll see you this weekend.
I'll see you many times in the next.
Yes. I'll see you frequently. But people who are watching this will see you next on Monday for the panel on Biden and U.S. Empire with you and Rania Khalek and Katie Halper. So we're going to do that on Monday. I should also say Sunday. We've been doing the Sunday night breakdowns of old debates that are available on YouTube. So the next one of those, Bhaskar Sankara is going to join me to watch a 1990s debate from when Hitchens was a leftist, between Christopher Hitchens and some Ayn Rand Institute guys. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And next Wednesday, before you go, Danny, So I don't know if you want to do this as soon as next week, but Forrest had an interesting idea.
What is it?
So I had the idea that we would watch Dr. Strangelove and talk to you about it.
Oh, nice. For sure. Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah. That's
so
like what I actually know about.
You want to do that next Wednesday?
Yeah. We'll email, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, tentatively, let's do that.
I got the idea for that because we did the TMBS illicit history that you talked to Michael about the Rand Institute. So Vic and I made that illicit history. And at the end of it, I remember searching through like Dr. Strangelove clips and wondering how much of that we could use.
A ton. Yeah. They Dr. Strangelove presents a report from the Bland Corporation. Get it? Yeah, no, there's a ton of connections, which we'll talk about. But absolutely, I'd love to do it.
All right, sounds good. See you, Danny.
Bye, guys.
All
right. Final thoughts about Wiseguy.
I just wanted to say thank you for, I don't know, I think I read In Cold Blood a long time ago, but besides that, I'm not sure I've read a true crime book in a very long time. So thank you for forcing me to have a bit more of a well-balanced book diet and read some of this true crime stuff. It was great.
Nice.
I'll offer my trademark succinct review. Good book.
Fair enough, Forrest.
I just, I listened to it a second time because it was like the audiobook is like extremely listenable, and I couldn't stop thinking about our like ANCAP mafia conversation that we had on last episode. So
yeah, no, absolutely. I think the ANCAP mafia stuff comes out very clearly here, as does again everything we were talking about earlier in the episode about the mafia, or at least the version of the mafia maybe that Henry is experiencing as somebody who can't be a full member So he's just kind of working all these hustles, on behalf of, but without having people who are paying up to him and maybe the normal mafia structure. As proto gig economy. Danny's absolutely right about that. I mean, that was impossible not to think about, the entire time, how it's like, oh yeah, in a way, right? I mean, obviously Henry Hill was like probably one of the best people who's maybe ever, right, been best at this, right? But like in a non-criminal way, right? The world he's describing is kind of the one that everybody's living in.
And there's no way to keep track of your stuff on like a resume or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's whatever the last thing you did is, whatever the last score was. That's the only thing that they care about. Like, so there's no job safety or job guarantee or, you know what I mean? Like they're not. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. No, absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, that's very, very resonant for the, gigified, adjunctified, Uberized, world, that, the hellscape that we're all living in now. But so anybody who's functioning in that and hasn't developed a coke habit, good for you.
One last fun thing I wanted to mention. I just discovered this randomly when I was reading a little bit about Henry Hill. Is that there's a kind of sequel, almost a sequel to Goodfellas, which I don't know if you guys came across this. My Blue Heaven. Yeah, anyone remember this movie? It was a Steve Martin, Rick Moranis movie. Came out right almost at the same time as Goodfellas. Apparently, Nora Ephron, who was forget his name, the author of Wiseguy's wife, also talked to Henry Hill a lot. And so she wrote this little romantic comedy about a mobster in the witness protection program out west. His wife leaves him. He falls into crime, but it's Steve Martin as the gangster. It's, from what I remember, it's not a great movie, but I want to rewatch it now just to think of it as the sequel to Goodfellas.
Listen, the words "gangster movie" with Rick Moranis. Who can say no to that?
So Rick Moranis is the FBI agent who's trying to kind of keep Steve Martin in line while he's being ready to testify and everything. And of course, Steve Martin's running cons and doing all the Henry Hill stuff while in the witness protection program.
Yeah, actually, I guess along somewhat similar lines, I should also say that a fascinating little stray detail. It's the tiniest part of the book, is that there was a point during the bad times, that you see at the end of the movie, where Karen actually does succeed in convincing Henry to have a couple sessions with the therapist.
Yeah.
So a little. Which I wonder how much of that, sort of planted a seed in the minds of various writers, who ended up analyzed this and The Sopranos.
Yeah.
There's other things that, like, I don't know how much it registered with anybody that had, read the book, but Vesuvio is the name of the restaurant that Paulie gets, that they disrespect him at. There's multiple Beansies in different
That's right. Yep.
books. Like there's just like a list of things that like I feel like have to have registered with
David Chase.
Yeah.
No, for sure. I think in many ways, large and small. I mean, most obviously the cast, but many ways. I think Goodfellas and probably also Wiseguy. We're definitely source material that was pillaged for The Sopranos.
Mm-hmm.
But speaking of The Sopranos, I mentioned this earlier, but the next in the series of Sopranos episode recaps with Mike Racine, Nando Villa, and Wosny Lambre is dropping for patrons tomorrow, and we'll have some kind of preview on the YouTube channel and the podcast feed here. If people who are interested in doing that. That's $5 a month. So, so if you can spare that from the money that you earn from one of the 200 hustles that everybody now has to engage in to keep themselves alive as the mundane versions of Henry Hill that we've all been forced to become, really appreciate it. Helps support everything we do here. Helps pay everybody's salary. Actually, before I let everybody go, either of you guys want to join us for the Doctor Strangelove one?
Oh yeah, sure.
Sure, yeah. Been a while since I've seen that.
Yeah.
Nice. All right. Yep. Let's do it. All right. Awesome. Thanks, guys. Thanks everybody who watched. Really appreciate it. Left is best.